We're going to be going over the 2011 free response questions, problem 1, part B today. And so I expect you will have read over the problem and understand it basically. It's essentially a problem of how do you trim zeros from an array, or how do you trim off a certain portion of an array based on a criteria. So we need to kind of tackle it. You got this array called samples, which contains a bunch of integers, and you're told that the beginning of it will contain some zeros, and you want to get rid of the zeros here, the zeros representing silence. So the question is, how do you find out how much you want to remove? So the first thing you need to do is, one, we need to figure out how many zeros there are. And then two, we need to set up a new array to copy the values into from the, starting after the zero, the last zero in the beginning. And then three, we need to set up a new array. Oh, we need to actually copy those values from the old one into the new one. And then we need to, because we're told we want a sample should reflect it should be trimmed, so we need to point samples at the new array. So we need to say that samples is the new thing that we built. We just need to assign it that value. All right, so how do we do the first thing? Well, we need to figure out how many zeros there are at the beginning. So I'm just going to set up a counter variable, because anytime you need to do things over and over, you need some sort of count variable. And this one, when we don't know how long to do something, we almost always use a while loop. So we're going to say while samples at the index equals 0. All we want to do is keep incrementing the index until we have found a non-zero entity, our entry in samples. So let's just imagine that the first two values in samples are 0. So samples at I is 0, samples at 0 equals 0, yes. Increment I is now 1. Samples at 1 equals 0, yes. I is now 2, we increment it. Samples at 2, I just said no 0. So I stays at 2. Now we move on. What does 2 represent? In this case, well, 2 represents the index of the first non-zero entry. So we have some information we can work with. All right, let's use it to build a new array into which we'll put our values. So we're going to say this is called trimmed samples equals new integer array of size samples dot length minus I. Cool, huh? Because we know how many zeros there are, so let's trim them off a little bit. And then the number 2 is set up a new array to copy. Oh, I did number 2, sorry. Let's put this up on top. And number 3 now says copy those values. All right, well, we need to iterate over a portion of samples and put all those values in trimmed samples. So the way I did this is just to set up a for loop for int j equals 0. J is less than trimmed samples dot length and j plus plus, and then what we want to do is we just want to say trimmed samples at j equals samples at I plus j, because that adjusts the indices enough over based on how many zeros there were. So if there are 2, it starts j at 2, or it starts copying values at index 2, and so on and so forth. The final thing we need to do is point the array samples at the new array trimmed samples. And we just do that by saying samples equals trimmed samples. And we're done, semicolon. All right, and that is all for problem 1 from 2011, part B.